Shalom, greetings, peace be upon you, and welcome back to the broadcast. I'm Shawn. Website can be found at scriptureandprophecy.com. That's where you go to find the archives, and that's where you go to support this mission of truth. Well, I'm wanting to start a series in the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. We've been through 1st and 2nd Samuel, except I realized recently that we didn't finish 2nd Samuel. There were still 2 chapters, one of which is fairly important. And so this morning we are going to cap off our study for 1st and 2nd Samuel with reading the last 2 chapters of this story, chapter 23 and chapter 24. Now, it's interesting because chapter 24 kind of plays into a theme and a topic that we've been talking a lot about lately, and that is the sovereignty of God. In chapter 24, we have a story that's really reminiscent, to me personally anyway, of the Pharaoh-Egypt situation. And we've been over that quite a bit. We talked about how we talked about the sovereignty of God and how God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And then we have to wrestle with the question, well, does Pharaoh even have a choice? And one of the conclusions that I've come to after studying it many, many times, and probably a half a dozen times or more on this podcast, is that judgment was due to Egypt. The cup had become full. The cup of iniquity had become full, and it was time for all these things to take place, for the Israelites to be set free, for God's glory and power to be made known to the Egyptians, and for judgment to come on Egypt for what they had done. And therefore, God hardening Pharaoh's heart was just and right. In this situation, we have King David, and this is the last story in 2 Samuel. King David commits this sin of numbering the people. And then there's great consequence to doing that. But there's a couple of elements. There's this line in here. Let me just read the very first verse of chapter 24. And it says, "And again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, 'Go, number Israel and Judah.'" This is difficult theologically because it seems to be saying David committed this sin, yet, David did this thing that was wrong, which brought judgment on Israel, but it says that God moved David to do it. And and as we get into Kings, there's several things like that are difficult to wrestle with. And one thing is, we don't always have to have the answers. Like, we don't have to know and understand everything there is about God in order to believe that God is who he says he is. But there are things that we will wrestle with that will be strugglesome. Some people really find it difficult dealing with the whole Pharaoh, God hardened his heart thing. I personally don't find it difficult, but many do. This is another one of those things that you really have to just bow down to the sovereignty of God and understand that he has reasons and purposes for these things. It starts off with, "And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel." So because of their sin and disobedience, this has come upon them. But it's difficult to deal with the fact that God would move David to do something that would bring judgment. But it is what it says. All right, we will get into that, chapter 24, but first we got to read chapter 23, which is really kind of just like a genealogy, and it's got some last words of David, and then the mighty men of David accounted for with some of the incredible works that they had done. So let's read through chapter 23. It's 39 verses. And then we'll get to this story of David numbering Israel, and then David given a choice. What judgment do you want? And there's some wisdom in David's response that I think will resonate with us. Okay, now that the stage is set, let's begin. Chapter 23, the book of 2 Samuel, King James Bible. Verse 1. Now these be the last words of David. David the son of Jesse said, the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel said, the Spirit of the Lord spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the rock of Israel spake to me, he that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And he should be as a light of the morning when the sun rises, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after rain. Although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made me with an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things, and sure. For this is all my salvation and all my desire, although he make it not to grow. But the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. But the man that shall touch them must be fenced with iron and the staff of a spear, and they shall be utterly burned with fire in the same place. These be the names of the mighty men whom David had. The Tachomite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains, the same was Adino. The Eznite, he lifted up his spear against 800, whom he slew at one time. And after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Ahite, one of the 3 mighty men with David, when they defeated the Philistines that were there gathered together to battle, and the men of Israel were gone away. He rose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary, and his hand clave unto the sword, and the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. And after him was Shammah, the son of Agi the Harite. And the Philistines were gathered together into a troop, where it was a piece of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines. But he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. And 3 of the 30 chief went down and came to David in the harvest time into the cave of Adullam, and the troop of the Philistines pitched in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in a hold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David longed and said, Oh, that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate. And the 3 mighty men brake through the host of Philistines, and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. And he said, Be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things did these 3 mighty men. And Abashi, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief among 3. And he lifted up his spear against 300, and slew them, and had the name among thee. Was he not the most honorable of 3? Therefore he was their captain. Howbeit he attained not unto the first 3. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kebaziel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went down also and slew a lion in the midst of a pit in time of snow. And he slew an Egyptian, a goodly man, and the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, and he went down to him with a staff, and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and slew him with his own spear. These things did Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and had the name among 3 mighty men. He was more honorable than the 30, but he attained not to the first 3, and David set him over his guard. Asahel, the brother of Joab, was one of 30. Elihan, the son of Dodo of Bethlehem. Shammah the Harodite. Elika the Harodite. Helez the Palatite. Ira the son of Ikesh the Tekite. Abazar the Anethiohite, Mabinuna the Hathuahite, Zalman the Ahohite, Mahari the Naphthalahite, Helab the son of Baanah, a Naphthalahite, Ittiah the son of Rabiah, out of Gibeah of the children of Benjamin, Benaiah the Parahite, Hidiah of the brooks of Gaash, Ahibalon the Harbaahite, Azmaveth the Bahuramite, Ahilabab the Shahalabanite of the sons of Jason, Jonathan, Shammah of the Hararite, Ahiam of the son of Sha'ar the Hararite, Eliphalet the son of Abishai, the son of Malachite, Elam the son of Ahithophel of Gilonite, Hezrai the Carmelite, Pari of the Arbite, Igal the son of Nathan of Zobath, Bani the Giddite, Zelek the Ammonite, Nahari the Berahite, armor-bearer of Joab the son of Zeriah, Ira the Ihrite, Gareb and Ithrite, Ura the Hittite, 37 in all. Alright, please note, that's the end of chapter 23. By the way, those last few verses, difficult to read when you're trying to read these names and their tribes. Very challenging. The stories of the mighty men are quite fascinating as well. You know, you have Adino, the Esnite. He lifted up his spear against 800 and slew them all at one time. That's unthinkable, unfathomable. Some of these things that they did. This guy says Anabaniah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabazeel, who had done many acts, and he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab, and he went down also and slew a lion in the midst of a pit of snow. And there's another guy that slew 300 men at one time. I mean, this is unbelievable. And I'm sure that there's some amazing things that we just don't know historically that took place with all these battles with the Philistines and with giants, and some amazing stories out there to be discovered, surely. All right. Now we're going to get to chapter 24, David's sin and numbering the people. Let's have a look at it, and I will read a little commentary from Matthew Henry. Maybe that'll help us a little bit to reconcile some of these challenges. Here's chapter 24. And again the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, Go, number Israel and Judah. For the king said to Joab, the captain of the host, which was with him, Go now through all the tribes of Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, and number ye the people, that I may know the number of the people. And Joab said unto the king, Now the Lord thy God add unto thy people how many soever they be, 100-fold, and that the eyes of my lord the king may see it. But why doth my lord the king delight in this thing? Notwithstanding, the king's word prevailed against Joab, and against the captains of the host. And Joab and the captains of the host went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel. And they passed over Jordan, and pitched in Aroer, on the right side of the city that lieth in the midst of the river of Gad, and toward Jazer. Then they came to Gilead, and the land of Tatim Hodashai, and they came to Dan Jaan, and about to Zidon. And it came to the stronghold of Tyre, and all the cities of the Hivites, of the Canaanites, and they went out to the south of Judah, even to Beersheba. So when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem, at the end of 9 months and 20 days. And Joab gave up the sum of the number of the people unto the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men that drew the sword, and the men of Judah were 500,000 men. And David's heart smote him after that he had numbered the people. And David said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly in that I have done, and now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly. For when David was up in the morning, the word of the Lord came unto the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and say unto David, Thus saith the Lord, I offer thee 3 things. Choose thee one of them, that I may do it unto thee. So Gad came to David, and told him, and he said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in thy land? Or wilt thou flee 3 months before thy enemies, while they pursue thee? Or that there be 3 days pestilence in thy land? Now advise and see whatever I shall return to him that sent me. All right, so let's take a minute. So God's anger is moved against Israel, so he moves David to do this thing of numbering the tribes. Now, I don't know if the sin is because of pride. Look at my kingdom. How many people are in my kingdom? I'm not, it's debatable. But that's not what I want to focus on. Either way, it's a sin. It's made known to David through the prophet Gad, who is a seer. And he's given 3 choices as his punishment. You can have 7 years of famine. That's pretty bad. You can go back to running from your enemies for 3 months. That's pretty bad. Of course, both of those things have to deal with men. Or you can have 3 days of pestilence that come into Israel. None of those options seem delightful. I'd be asking, is there a 4th option? But here's what David said. And David said unto Gad, I am in a great strait. Let us fall now into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, and let me not fall into the hand of man. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from morning even to the time appointed, and there died of the people from Dan even to Beersheba 70,000 men. This is an interesting statement by David. Rather than famine or running from men, he chooses the pestilence because he believes that God will be more merciful than if God used people to bring in judgment, because people are less kind, less loving, less merciful than God is. And that's an interesting truth. So David said to Gad, I am in a great strait. Let us fall now into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, and let me not fall into the hand of man. That's such an interesting statement, such a true statement. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from morning even time to the time appointed, and there died of the people from Dan even to Beersheba 70,000 men. And when the angel stretched out his hand upon Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord repented him of the evil, and said to the angel that destroyed the people, It is enough. Stay now thy hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing place of Araunah the Jebusite. And David spake unto the Lord when he saw the angel that smote the people, and he said, Lo, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Let thy hand, I pray thee, be against me and against my father's house. So, just as David had hoped, though, the original plan, apparently, was restrained. Right? So you had 70,000 people die. The angel was getting ready to put his hand over Jerusalem. And God said, no, we're going to stop here. David is able supernaturally somehow to see this. And then he's grieved that that all of Israel would pay the price of one man's sin. And it's a lesson that this is the case. This is why it's so important to have godly leaders. Because ungodly leaders will lead you into destruction, as we are seeing worldwide right now. What happens when the devil's children rule the world? Verse 18, And Gad came that day to David, and said unto him, Go up, rear an altar unto the Lord, in the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And David, according to the saying of Gad, went up as the Lord had commanded. And Araunah looked and saw the king and his servants coming on toward him. And Araunah went out and bowed himself before the king, and his face upon the ground. And Araunah said, Wherefore is my lord the king come to his servant? And David said, To buy the threshing floor of thee, to build an altar unto the Lord, that the plague may be stayed from the people. And Araunah said unto David, Let my lord the king take and offer up what seemeth good unto him. Behold, here be an oxen for the burnt offering, and threshing instruments and other instruments of oxen for wood. And all these things did Araunah as a king give unto the king. And Araunah said unto the king, The Lord thy God accept thee. And the king said to Araunah, Nay, but I will surely buy it of thee at a price. Neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God, which have cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. And David built there an altar unto the Lord, and he offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord was entreated for the land, and the plague was stayed from Israel. And that is how 2 Samuel ends, with this bizarre story about judgment. It's also a story about mercy and grace, God's mercy in contrast with men's mercy. It's also a story about how important godly leadership is. Yes, David made a mistake, but he owned the mistake, understood that people were suffering because of his poor decisions, and went forth to try to reconcile that. He prays to God for mercy. There's just so much we could deal with there. Let me read Matthew Henry's commentary real quick before we wrap up about the first 9 verses, right? About this whole anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them. Here's what he says. For the people's sin, David was left to act wrong, and in his chastisement they received punishment. This example throws light upon God's government of the world and furnishes a useful lesson. The pride of David's heart was his sin in numbering the people. He thought thereby to appear the more formidable, trusting in an arm of flesh more than he should have done. And though he had written so much of trusting in God only, God judges not of sin as we do. What appears to us harmless, or at least but a small offense, may be a great sin in the eyes of God, who discerns the thoughts and intents of the heart. Even godly men can discern evil tempers and wrong conduct in believers, of which they themselves often remain unconscious. But God seldom allows those whom he loves the pleasures they sinfully covet. Wow. Matthew Henry was you need to go study Matthew Henry if you haven't. This idea that men were not as smart as we are today is absurd. Matthew Henry was an absolute genius who committed his life to writing and commentating about God's word, and the man only lived to be in his, I think, late 40s or early 50s, so he wasn't even here very long, but this paragraph is extremely powerful and really breaks down clearly what's going on here. I like it. Let me just read that last part again, because this is such great wisdom. God judges sin not as we do. What appears to us harmless, or at least but a small offense, may be great sin in the eye of God, who discerns the thoughts and intents of the heart. We need to be careful about, well, this isn't a big deal. I mean, you wouldn't think it's a big deal. Okay, he wants to do a census and know how many people are in Israel. Okay, yeah, it's a little prideful, a little arrogant, but what's the harm? What's the big deal? Well, it led to 70,000 dead because it angered God. What appears to us as harmless or a small offense may be a great sin in the eyes of God. Such wisdom. Such wisdom. I pray you've been blessed this morning. I don't know how you could hear this story, hear this commentary from Matthew Henry, and not be changed, not be blessed, not be full of truth. The things of God, I'm trying to find the words. Jesus said, man doesn't live on bread alone, but every word that proceeds, right, from God. Paraphrasing, obviously. If you don't have this coming into your heart and soul and mind, you're empty. Because nothing else will satisfy. Nothing else will fill. Okay, starting to ramble. Thanks for listening. Peace and grace be with all of you, and until next time, God bless.